Hello, and welcome to the Thief in the Empty Room podcast, where Zen meets business in a unique exploration of mindfulness and mental health. Join me, your host, Craig French, as I sit down with artists, entrepreneurs, and Zen teachers to uncover the secrets of expanding creative problem solving, reducing stress, and finding balance in this fast-paced world. The name of this podcast is based off of my favorite Zen koan, which is basically a short story or fable used to teach aspiring monks and practitioners. This koan is as follows. A monk asked his teacher, what concrete thing did the ancestral masters get when they obtained the peaceful state? The teacher said, it is like a thief who enters an empty room. This is open to interpretation, of course. That's what the point of these koans is to make you think and ponder and question your own sort of reality, your own existence, your own stereotypes. But what this really says to me is that a thief is someone who is in pursuit of gold and, material possessions, thinking that they're going to be happy once they possess these material things. They break into the room and they're disappointed to realize that the room is completely empty. So we have to keep this all in mind as we pursue all these external rewards with our jobs and careers and money and finance, and understand that the work is really done within. With that being said, this is episode 6 with my friend Chris Aola that I grew up with and went to high school with. He went on to become a successful TV show and documentarian producer. The one project that he worked on that really inspired me to reach out and book him for this podcast was Alone, my favorite TV show of all time. For those who are not familiar, Alone is a survival show, the most real, authentic survival show on television, where 10 contestants are dropped off in the wilderness with only 10 items, and they have to film themselves, and the winner wins a cash prize. It's incredibly powerful to watch. I dug into his ideas on filming and producing that show, along with some other work he did around the pandemic. And he touches on his philosophies about America's lack of humbleness, being alone in the woods, and the juxtaposition of greed versus compassion. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I am super excited to have an old friend of mine, Chris Aola. Say hi to the interwebs.
What's up, interwebs?
The reason why I'm super excited about this conversation is, for anyone who's listened to this podcast knows obviously my brand and what I'm trying to promote: meditation, mindfulness, Zen, spirituality. Chris and I don't necessarily have a specific background in that, but his background is super interesting, being producer of many documentaries a lot of us have seen and watched. He's based in Brooklyn, New York. We went to high school together, so we go way, way back. But he's been a part of some really interesting projects, all which I find so fascinating, Chris, how you found projects that are so cut from my cloth. I like quickly reading through your list, and then we'll save 2 specific projects for later on. But for those listening, Chris has been a producer on Tiny House Hunting, Forged in Fire, and Pawn Stars. I am obsessed with the tiny house movement. I'm fascinated by people who can make katanas, knives, and swords out of steel. And Pawn Stars was probably the original OG sort of like reality TV show that was more based in, not like OG Jersey Shore, more based in historical academic reality television. So that's a little bit about your background. Produced over 20 of these types of documentaries and shows. Anything else you want to add about, your projects and what that's been like for you to work on some of these shows before we get into the other ones?
Yeah, it's been a privilege to work on so many shows that so many people know. I mean, Pawn Stars, that show's been on for almost 20 seasons now, I think, and I think everybody knows it. House Hunters International, I think that's a household name too. 90 Day Fiance, same thing there. So I've had the opportunity to work on a lot of very well-known shows.
And I imagine each show, each project, every project not only is different, but you're also having to learn and research probably based on the project you're working on. So you get fully immersed, I'm sure, in that topic or that world for that period of time, which must be pretty interesting.
The cool thing about my job is that for a period of time from when I hop onto a project until it's done, I sort of become an expert on a very specific subject. And that's what all producers really have to do. We have to absorb all the material, figure out how to tell a story about it, and make sure that we're telling it in an accurate way, particularly on some of the science projects that I've done over the years. I mean, you've got to really know the material that you're working with. So yeah, it's really cool that for a period of time, I become super knowledgeable about something, I wrap that project, and then I become super knowledgeable about something else.
You talking about being an expert on these topics that you end up producing. There's two projects that you were a part of that really is what excited me about, your background and your experience. And I'm excited to finally share that with the audience here. This is the first one. I mean, for anyone who knows me, particularly my old roommate, Paul, that I lived together with for about 4 years in Santa Monica, I started watching it living with him. Chris, I could probably almost start to cry. Absolutely freaking love this show. And I've gone on Zen retreats twice a year for every 6 months for about 8 years now, which obviously we can't right now because of the pandemic. I've learned to really enjoy being alone. I've sort of trained myself in my brain. I also love nature and the outdoors. I love camping and hiking. I love survival. I love feeling connected to Mother Nature and the earth. And when this show came out, there had been other shows that I know you guys probably considered to be somewhat of competition or maybe even paved the way. Survivor Man, Naked and Afraid, Bear Grylls is a legend in this space. But there's something that you guys did with this show, and obviously I'm going to shut up and let my guests speak at some point, but for my listeners who aren't familiar with Alone, it's on History Channel. It's now being streamed on Netflix. There's 10 contestants that go to remote places. They've filmed multiple seasons in Vancouver Island. They've gone to Mongolia. They've gone to Patagonia. The contestants have to film themselves with GoPros and tripod cameras. Last man standing wins $500,000. There is no one else out there. They're completely alone until they hit a GPS walkie-talkie that says, I'm tapping out, come get me. I'm too thin, I'm too shriveled up, I'm too exhausted, I'm too hungry, I'm too tired, I miss my family too much. There's a multitude of reasons. You guys hit some weird synergistic balance with this show. Thank you for helping produce this show. I'm so fascinated to hear more about it from your perspective on filming it, on the contestants, the locations, whatever you care to share, obviously.
Yeah, well, I know you're a huge fan of the show, and thank you for all the accolades. I still keep in touch with a lot of the people who make the show. I'll pass all that along. Yeah, Alone's a really special show. There's nothing else like it on television. There really isn't. The number one reason for that is because unlike a lot of other television, Alone is real. It's the real deal. I can't say that for all the shows I work on, but Alone is what you see is what it is. There's really nothing made up about it. And I think right away that strikes a chord with people. I think people think that it might be fake, which is it's interesting because I think people to a degree are used to expecting something phony, but it's really not. And also for some reason, people confuse this show, if they don't know it, they confuse it with Naked and Afraid. And I always say, well, the people on Alone are usually clothed. They might be afraid, but totally different show.
That's really cool to hear that it's the real deal. And their experience. I started practicing Zen about 10 years ago. There was something that clicked in me. Similar to you, we both have been very motivated, driven people. We've both accomplished quite a bit at our age. I was always searching for the golden egg or the dangling carrot. And it wasn't necessarily all financial or monetary sort of based, but there was something that I'm in pursuit of. Early adulthood, Crooked Jaw and Shark Tank, then moving out here and being in tech sales. And I did Zen. I sat with myself in complete silence and stillness for the first time. And I was like, wow, I think everything I've been searching for is right here. It was a very profound sort of game-changing, completely life-altering experience. From there, I went, sitting once a week with my Zen group in Santa Monica to sitting multiple days a week to sitting at home by myself, and then eventually going on retreat where we go to Mount Baldy, where Leonard Cohen actually wrote Hallelujah, because he was a part of the Mount Baldy Zen Center community, and he actually wrote Hallelujah up at Mount Baldy Zen Center. So it's a really special place. And I started going there for 3-day retreats, no cell phone service. And I remember the first couple of times I would come back to a tech sales job, I'd leave the mountain, you'd start getting closer and closer to LA, traffic would start picking up. For me, it wasn't anxiety.
You could feel it creeping in, right?
You could feel it creeping in. And then by Monday morning, when I was back in like an office having to make phone calls with a whole room full of salespeople, it was like full on like culture shock in a way. And so what I did as a response, as a result to that was I was like, wow, I really enjoyed that mindfulness lifestyle, because you're still a human. You're still drinking tea. You're still raking leaves. You're still going to the bathroom. You're still eating meals, but you're doing everything basically in silence. You're doing everything mindful. And I was like, there's got to be a way to incorporate an everyday sort of normal human existence within society, but incorporating that, finding the middle way, if you will. Going on retreat completely changed my life as the way Zen practiced it. So it was a progression. But I think about people who share a similar passion for this, but maybe didn't find the middle way. And so I have a stack of books here that I think is related to Alone and what we're talking about. And for those listening and can't see, I'm holding up the book called Into the Wild, which was probably one of the first books and movies that probably started stoking my flame a little bit. For those who don't know my background, I ended up playing lacrosse in college. I got recruited to play at a number of Division I schools, and I chose to go to the University of Denver because I fell in love with the mountains. Chris McCandless, the main character in Into the Wild, who gives up his entire life savings to Oxfam and packs up his car, drives cross country from, Tennessee or somewhere down in the south where he was from, abandons his car in Joshua Tree National Park, I believe, and hikes all the way up north to Alaska to try to go live off the land. Spoiler alert, he gets himself a little bit too far in over his head with his probably lack of survival skills and knowledge, and he dies at a very young age. And it's become this really kind of sad story, but it also is a really eye-opening tale of unrelenting Mother Nature can be. And going back to Alone, obviously, these participants, I know that you've experienced this firsthand through filming them and editing them and getting to know them, that this is not something you could take lightly, going out into the wilderness completely alone, surviving off the land.
I didn't read Into the Wild until probably some point within the last 10 years or so, if not sooner. And it's a great book, but the thing that's always stuck with me is, and this is something that I couldn't really put into words in a very easy to digest way. Season 2 of Alone features a guy named Jose, and he lasts pretty long. He doesn't win the season, but he lasts pretty long. And he's a really knowledgeable guy, very wise, and he had this saying, which was, humility prevents humiliation. And that is something that has always stuck with me. It's obviously true when it comes to wilderness survival, but it's true in everything. That is ultimately what was Chris McCandless's downfall, which was he did not bring a sense of humility to the entirety of the journey he was on. And it's an amazing journey, and the way that the author chronicles it is just fantastic. But that idea of being humble about everything you do, humility is really a key to living a meaningful life, I think. And that phrase, humility prevents humiliation, I just think that encapsulates the whole idea.
That's phenomenal. I appreciate you sharing that. And I don't want to turn this podcast too political, but this idea of being humble, it makes me think of a really famous Zen quote, teacher, book named Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, written by Shunryu Suzuki. He talks about having a beginner's mind, with almost anything you do. And that really, in a way, is being humble. Just recognizing that there's always stuff that you could learn. The second you think you know it all, especially in a nature sort of survival setting, the second you think you know it all, boy, oh boy, is that probably the second that you've experienced some major, difficulties.
Yeah, absolutely. And the funny thing is that Sean Witt, who's the executive producer of Alone, he's one of the creators of the show. He's a really, really nice guy, and had the opportunity to work with him and met with him one day and just kind of had like a career talk. I just wanted to get some insight from him as I'm kind of moving up the ladder of being a producer. And one of the things I remember that he said, and there were a lot of good things he said, but ties into this idea of humility, which the advice was always think like a PA, a production assistant. The idea that no matter how high up the chain you get, you need to have the mentality that you're not afraid to chip in and do something. There's always something you don't know. You have to work with a team of people to accomplish things in that kind of a production environment. So that kind of mentality, I think, ties into the humility.
It's interesting you bring him up and you talk about that, because early on I talked about how you guys hit this weird sort of like synchronistic golden, I don't know what word I'm looking for, but you guys struck a chord, I think, with the success of the show. And I think about organization, especially with sports or government, starts from the top. Clearly, Alone is being produced by a great thinker who's humble, thinks about all aspects of the production and the team. And he's not just thinking like, oh, now I'm executive producer of this successful show, like sipping on my latte. I'm sure he exemplifies that realness.
Yeah, I totally agree. It starts from the top. The fish rots from the head.
Which is another Alone reference. I mean, that makes me think of one of the contestants who, I don't remember his name, incredible. I mean, when he got pulled out of after his vitality check, or I don't know what they call it, he had a whole stockpile of fish that he had dried, and he wasn't eating it at a fast enough caloric intake to keep himself healthy. And so he had killed it, and I'm saying killed it in a positive way. He had done a great job fishing and got actually a surplus, but then he didn't ration it properly, and he still ended up being disqualified and that was such a hard thing to see, that he had food and yet still was asked to leave the show because his health had deteriorated so much.
Yeah, I think you're referring to Dave from season 3, Patagonia.
Dave was incredible. What an amazing contestant.
He was completely emaciated, and he had an entire stockpile of dried fish that he could have eaten, but.
Cool, man. Well, listen, let's move on to the next project of yours. So, Chris, you have to bring me back sort of when this all came to fruition, because
we made a documentary series I came on the project in the winter of 2019, was post-producing, which is essentially, you can think of it like editing. And I started that project and started taking a look at the footage.
For those listening that haven't seen it, it deals primarily with influenza and different strains of the flu, the avian flu, H1N1, touches on a little bit of Ebola, SARS, swine flu. But, there are people all around the globe working on it, and the flu seemed to be everyone's major priority. Again, why I feel like it ties into Zen and Buddhism is this idea of interconnectedness, treating people with compassion. I like on my podcast to bring up books.
I like that you bring up books because I'm always looking for good recommendations.
So I have a book here that is one of my favorite books of all time, and it's called Ishmael. It has a really, really famous line that is one of my favorite of all time in any book. And it says, "Teacher seeks pupil, must have an earnest desire to save the world. Apply in person." This is a cult classic, a spiritual cult classic. It's kind of one of the books that got me onto my spiritual path and journey. But Ishmael is a gorilla that could speak English and is incredibly smart. Turns out he's the one who took out that ad in the newspaper. His main student is kind of down and out on his life and the world, and he sees this ad in the newspaper. This is in the 80s. And he's like, what do I got to lose? Let me go. He applies to, the ad, and he goes and meets a giant gorilla who's Ishmael. Ishmael basically ends up walking him from his perspective through the entire history of humanity, from basically like the first humans to now in the 80s. And one of the things, Chris, that I find super fascinating about Ishmael, and from Ishmael's perspective, he breaks down humanity into two. There was a fork in the road at one point in our history. And he describes it as the givers and the takers. And he basically says that the givers were people living off of the land. They were the nomadic humans that you could probably still find in Aboriginal tribes in Australia and in the Amazon. Hunter-gatherers, nomadic people. They were in unison and they were in equilibrium with the land and their environment. At a certain point in human history, there became the agricultural sort of revolution, and Ishmael describes that as the takers. And humans started developing and cultivating the land to manipulate it to their needs and their desires. So how can they start farming the land so they could stay put in one place so they don't have to keep moving around? They inevitably exhausted those resources and then had to move on to the next area, leaving that piece of land completely obviously decimated. We set off on this taker sort of society hundreds of millions of years ago, actually, and we're still on that path today. And another quick little anecdote from the book that I want to bring up to you is Ishmael tells a story to his student again about comparing our society to an airplane that takes off the side of a mountain. So the airplane takes off and the pilot thinks he's got it all figured out. He's flying over, the cliff where he's taken off from. He's feeling good. He's got a lot of momentum, but then the momentum starts to wane a little bit. And he looks down and he sees basically a whole grave of failed, crashed planes. And he's confused because everything's going so great for him. And what he doesn't realize is that his fate is basically the same as everyone else before him. He didn't quite look deeply enough about the way he built the plane. History repeats itself. In the documentary, Pandemic, one of the professors and scientists that you guys interview and have on is one of the main characters, is in Rome, and he's kind of looking around Rome, and he makes a comment that there's no way the Romans in a million years ever have thought that they would have been a failed civilization, and that we now, years later, be looking back at their relics and saying to ourselves, wow, I can't believe that they failed so abysmally. We're trying to learn where things went wrong. But the sad reality is that we haven't learned all that much, have we?
No, not at all. The person you're talking about is Dr. Dennis Carroll, who I had the opportunity to interview him a few times. He's just such a wealth of knowledge, and that particular moment in the series when he's in Rome, the Eternal City, and he's waxing poetic about how there was a civilization 2,000 years ago that thought they peaked. And for all intents and purposes, they did peak. The Roman Empire, when it collapsed, civilization collapsed along with it. And those people could not have imagined that there would be thousands of years where we would essentially be trying to rebuild to that. A lot of the things that we have today, the Romans had thousands of years ago. They had roads, they had beautiful architecture and buildings, they had aqueducts, they had medicine, they had an understanding of science that all that stuff went away for a really long time. And it's this idea that everything is impermanent. There are cycles in life. That includes us right now. We think we have achieved the pinnacle of greatness society, particularly from the American point of view. But that's not true. There's a lot more to come. Civilizations have risen and fallen. And there's this idea that, yeah, things come and go. They really do. And there is, you can be at peace with that idea, or you'd also be a little frightened of that idea too.
Yeah, well, that obviously brings us to, a key tenet and pillar of Buddhism, which is impermanence, and this idea that everything is impermanent. Everything is constantly in change. Every breath we take and we breathe in and we breathe out, the molecular form is changing on a moment-to-moment basis. In American culture, in particular, as you mentioned, there is a lack of humbleness that has been built into society here. We have prided ourselves on being in the best country, the most money and the best jobs and the best infrastructure, the best economy and the best medical system and all this stuff. And it's guys, a couple of things to remember. One is be humble, because what is the best in relation to what? What are you comparing it to? Because again, Rome thought they were the best, and they probably were at that period of time. And two, Everything's impermanent. In a blink of an eye, everything can change. Other thing that Ishmael talks about that I think we're kind of alluding to is this idea of interconnectedness. The Dalai Lama wrote a book called The Universe in a Single Atom, The Convergence of Science and Spirituality. He wrote this book 2005, where he sort of talking about the interconnectedness of everything. And this leads me to another point, Chris, that you guys touch on in the documentary that makes me really sad because of my empathic nature, which is animals, and how often these viruses start from, I would say, three main animals. Of course, it's not just these three, but the three main ones are birds, pigs, and bats. Obviously, the wet markets in China and Asia, other animals that it could come from, dogs, cats, horses, whatever, fish. But those are the three main ones that seem to carry the most potent diseases and viruses that could translate easily, attach itself to the human form and condition. And I think since I've been a little kid, I've had a sadness innately in me. One of it has been around nature, and we touched on that a little bit with Alone and this idea of being connected or not connected. But then two, it's animals. And one of the things that jumps out to me, obviously in Pandemic, the documentary that you produced, is you guys go into these chicken factories in Asia. We have it all over America with the cow farms. It's so incredibly painful to watch this, how these animals are treated. And it's really not surprising that these viruses are potentially start in these conditions. It's like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out how unhealthy this could potentially be.
Yeah, I'd say in general, humans pretty shitty when it comes to treating animals kindly. I think as a species, we're pretty awful to the rest of the animals. I am not a vegan, not yet anyway. My wife and I are trying to cut down on meat for a couple of reasons, but yeah, I think we are really bad at treating animals we're animals too. We're just a different kind of animal. But I think we're pretty bad when it comes to treating them humanely. What we're talking about now is on this idea of a zoonotic disease, right? Which is a disease that starts in an animal and then leaps into another animal and then eventually makes its way into a human being. And that's when the problem starts for humans. But if we're being honest with ourselves, the problem really starts with the animals. And that was another idea that Dennis Carroll, the gentleman who we're talking about in Rome earlier, it's this idea that if we want to combat a disease, we have to go to where it starts. And it's this particular disease, the flu, starts in wild birds. That's where every influenza strain begins, is in wild birds.
It's fascinating, and it's really not going to go away. We could pretend like it's going to, as long as we have birds and we have animals and we're trying to cohabitate with them on this planet.
No, we will have to constantly deal with it. There's two fundamental ideas that are incompatible with each other, which is there's the idea of raising animals humanely, which for all intents and purposes for this podcast, let's just say that means giving animals an opportunity to go outside, to have sunlight, to walk on grass, not be inside of a closed prison type environment. On the other hand, you have that enclosed prison-like environment, which you see in one of the first scenes of Pandemic, where it's just, thousands upon thousands of chickens, and they're in this facility, they're in cages, they're not given the freedom to have fresh air or anything like that. And that's what we would consider biosecurity. Those are two competing ideas. You cannot have quote unquote humane conditions for animals and have biosecurity, because what biosecurity is doing is creating a firewall between those animals that are being raised for slaughter, for consumption, and wild animals that are in the environment outside. So for example, if you are a chicken farmer in, let's just say China, if you're a chicken farmer in China who is allowing his or her chickens to go outside and get sunlight and walk on grass, well, you might be raising happier animals. But you're also leaving the opportunity open where wild geese or another kind of wild bird can intermingle with those birds that you're raising. And that mingling is when the disease goes from those wild birds into your birds that you're raising, the domestic ones. And that mingling, all it takes is one virus. That's it. And then it spreads like wildfire throughout. So it's this weird give and take where there are people, there's a school of thought that animals should be raised with the ability to have some sense of what we would call freedom. And then there's the idea that you can't possibly keep animals from contracting viruses if you allow them to do that. And those two ideas are really at odds with each other. And the only solution to that really is a plant-based lifestyle where you're just taking farmed animals out of the equation altogether, because we are all connected. Those wild birds are connected to those birds that are being raised for food. There are workers who are in the environment with those birds being raised.
Yeah, breathing in the same circulated air and then going home and breathing that air into their loved ones. And
yeah, or they're touching the birds. There's a physical contact. Then they're going home to their families. Then the family's going out. This is how diseases spread. And when it's a bad one, that's how a major outbreak can start.
And we could talk about the global problem because obviously the documentary is a global documentary. But there were a couple of times where the scientists and the people that you were interviewing and following around were talking about hundreds of millions of deaths potentially, or like, let's just say millions of deaths. The doctor in India, but he makes interesting comment about, he's talking about the poor population in India, and he talks about how it's a three-pronged attack in order to be successful. Government, science, and the people and the population all kind of have to be working in unison together.
Our generation has gone through multiple traumas, and don't forget, we now have our second financial crisis.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up, but that's almost separate because financial is like, you're right about the financial crisis. You know what I mean? We're going through our second one now.
Yeah, there's something to the idea that unless there's a lot of people who, unless something has happened to them directly, that it almost doesn't exist, right? We're going to see this with climate change too. There's a whole political party in this country that does not believe that climate change is happening or that it's the fault of humans. There's a lot of resistance to do something about that problem.
Where's the silver lining in all of this?
The silver lining, that's a great question.
If there is one.
The silver lining in all this is that it's a way to check in and see what's working and what's not working. I think this has exposed, just on a national scale, the things that are not working in our country. I could go in a million different directions with this, but our healthcare system is completely absurd. Okay, your health insurance is tied to your job. Unemployment is through the roof. People are out of their job, and at the same time, we have people who are uninsured. It's absurd. This moment that we're living in right now, it should give us an opportunity to really look at what's not working and figure out how to change something. The status quo is not working. There's so many things in this country that have been the way they are for far too long. The least we can do is to look at these big societal problems, what our shortcomings are, and figure out what to do. Something needs to change. So I think that the silver lining here is that people will rethink how certain things are done in this country and how they've been done for a really long time. Our generation is unique. We've grown up with the internet. We are a generation where we're not working for 40 years at a company and retiring with a wristwatch and a pension. I mean, that's just not a possibility for us. I think our generation is going to be the one that really, and even the generations younger than us, Gen Z, is part of this too. It behooves us to really lead the charge with this and really examine what's working and what's not working and change those things that are not working.
I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate the projects you've attached yourself to. It's funny that you're in New York, which obviously has its own giant media entertainment epicenter, but being in LA, I'm definitely more in the heart of the industry. And I have a lot of friends that are editors and producers and are always looking to work on projects that are meaningful. I think you've done an incredible job in your career. And I want to just give you kudos and props for attaching yourself to projects and work that is having an impact. But if anything, it's giving you knowledge to then be a conduit to your friends, your family, your media community, a conduit of science, knowledge, information. Hence why I have you on this podcast today, because I know that topics are extremely relevant and you now have an intimate knowledge and experience with. So thank you for that. Thank you for being on. If anyone is interested in Chris's work, he's got a website, chrisayola.com. I'll put a link in the description for anyone who is interested in his work or wants to get in touch with him. And yeah, man, I mean, stay safe out there in Brooklyn, continue to do what you're doing, and thanks for your time, for your work.
Thanks so much for having me. I just want to close by saying that I'm very lucky, I'm very fortunate that I have had the chance to work on so many different things, all different kinds of subjects. And it's really just because other people have kept me in mind. And I think it gets back to that idea of interconnectedness. I've never gotten a job by applying online. I've gotten every single job, every single one, through a friend or a coworker.
That's similar to me.
I'm so grateful for that. And it's really given me an opportunity to work on all sorts of shows that I may not have had the opportunity to. And just one final thought on this idea of interconnectedness. Another show that I also worked on this year, had the absolute pleasure of producing, is also a Netflix documentary series called Connected. And the whole idea, the whole premise of Connected is that there is this great big world, this great big universe, and yet there are concepts and ideas and through lines that run through us all. It's a really fun science-based series, and it really hits on this idea where seemingly disconnected, disparate ideas actually have a lot in common. So to whoever's listening, I think you might really enjoy that idea.
You know, I grew up Jewish on Long Island. You know, we all come from different backgrounds and creeds. And I really did connect with Buddhism because more than any other religion, in my opinion, it talks and teaches and puts interconnectedness at the forefront of the teachings and the principles. And I appreciate you bringing that up because I believe that it is so abundantly true and right in our faces. It's our own ignorance and neglect that refuses to admit it. I recently posted on Facebook. I don't post that often, but sometimes I'll be in meditation. These like little lines will come to me. And I said, we're all connected, whether you want to believe it or not. We could pretend that we have political parties. We could pretend that we have borders separating us as states and as countries. We could pretend all these things because maybe from a societal standpoint, we have to have some boundaries and borders. But I want people to keep in mind that it's all in our minds. It's all fake in a way. It's our own way of trying to make sense of our reality. So we put these labels and these borders and boundaries on things to try to keep some semblance of order. It's important to remember that it doesn't exist. It's all a facade, and that we are all interconnected and that there's no way of getting around it. We're sitting on a rock spinning and floating in a galaxy that we don't even know what has it inside it and how long it goes on for. I mean, when you stop and think about it for a second, it's so beyond our recollection that we can't even really have proper conversations around it. Even if you are a NASA scientist, you still can't really even put your finger on what space the galaxy is and black hole, the sun, and it's beyond human intellect, I think, in a lot of ways. And that's why it's important, I think, to not be too consumed by consumerism, capitalism, technology, ego, and coming back to a lifestyle that allows you to just drop all of those labels, even if it's for 5 minutes a day, and to remind yourself that you are just a living, breathing human being that has a whole chain of events that led to your breathing and being alive. It goes back an infinite way, all the way to the Big Bang and when our universe first started, all of us. I mean, it's really incredible, and it's obviously very deep and hippy dippy for a lot of people, but I encourage people who are listening or watching this to think about it and actually believe it, and to understand that we're not going to survive as a species or improve as a species if we keep thinking that we're separate. Of course, we're going to have differences of opinions, but if we're making policies and principles that separate us instead of bring us all together and bring the animals together and the environment together, I believe that we're doomed. I hate to end on a bad note. Leonardo DiCaprio did a documentary called, I think, Before the Flood or After the Flood a few years ago. It was out of the same vein as Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. But this was an artist way back in like the 1500s.
Call this a Renaissance painting?
Thank you. The Renaissance sort of era of artwork. And, this artist had an intuition that what we're looking at right now is the first panel is sort of the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve and the sort of complete harmonious equilibrium of the planet. We're all working in conjunction and unison with one another. The middle is sort of a big chunk of humanity, right? Where we're sort of like a little bit ignorant. We're just
self-absorbed.
Yeah, we also don't really know, and things are still kind of cool, I guess, in a way, to use layman's terms. But the third panel, the third scene, is we've hit that tipping point, as I said to you earlier, using a Malcolm Gladwell term. We've now hit that tipping point as a society and obviously as a planet. And we've now entered into the phase of complete chaos, destruction, famine, disease. In general terms, like, explain to me how one could expect to get out of this phase and like go back unless there's a complete probably annihilation or a dying off of the current sort of like ecosystem, and it completely rebuilds itself, which lends us into another talk that we talked about before we started filming, which is we might potentially be in the middle of the 7th mass extinction. The one before us was the dinosaurs. And unfortunately, I believe, without getting too, morbid and depressive and pessimistic, I believe that humans have fallen a little bit too deeply into the greed hole. And we're now in that third scene. It's going to be very difficult for us to climb out of it. So if we are to be living in that scene, Chris, if you and I are in that scene right now, which we are, with you and I are literally in that little scene right now, what can we do to be okay with it? For me, that's meditation. That's mindfulness. That's love. That's compassion. In the middle of a world burning all around me, I'm going to sit in meditation like a Buddha and be that little glimmer of hope and light in that picture. And whatever ray of sunshine I could bring into that dark and depressive place, I will do it until the day I die. And that's my plan of action.
Well, I'm going to stand directly next to you so that I can get some of that ray of hope. That sounds like I think we're all going to need that.
I appreciate that, brother. Well, with that being said,
we're all on a spaceship, right? And we're not passengers. We're crew. We're all part of the same crew. That's it. Reminds me of another great 20th century thinker, Buckminster Fuller. He has this great book called Manual for Spaceship Earth. We are on a spaceship and we are all passengers. We have enough to make everything work. We just have to work together and do it. Sounds kind of hippy-dippy and corny, but it's true. We are all crew members on a spaceship.
If you've made it this far, that means you've listened to the whole podcast. And for that, I want to say thank you. Please feel free to visit my website or social media for more information on my work at Craig Jared French. Until next time.